Good morning, everybody. We are doing another episode of Saturday Artist Live Interviews, and today I have Travis M. Sparks from here on Instagram, a longtime friend and artist that inspires me for many different reasons. And I will. There he is. Perfect.
So, would you mind kind of telling us your name and a little bit about what you do?
Okay. Sheesh. So my name's Travis Sparks. My work is mostly painting and sculptural based, but I have done a little bit of performance and video work. Um, I tend to deal with a mix of subjects, but it always comes down to some kind of autobiographical element while I'm exploring combinations of profanity and sacred. So religion is a big topic in my work. I wasn't raised religious, which means I have a freer I don't have any guilt associated with it, so I can kind of use the subjects as I please without kind of feeling bad about it. But most of the time, it's not from a critical standpoint. I'm just interested in trying to make sense of the world that we live in. And I find that those three things are the primary components, I think.
Okay, so when did you start doing art? Was it like, did you start in childhood and kind of kept going doing it, or did it just hit you just one day?
Um, in terms of making real art, probably high school. I always drew because I grew up and I didn't have a lot of friends. So um, art was that kind of thing to let me do something and kind of find meaning and pass the time, I think, was a big thing. Um, but it probably took until high school or college that I actually started making work that was meaningful and original.
Okay, so did you start doing sculpture or painting first, or kind of like same
Painting
time?
painting first. I didn't have the means to do sculpture until later.
Did you find that doing sculpture enhanced your ability to paint realistically, or have they influenced each other at all?
They've definitely influenced each other. I don't know. I know that my ability to paint and draw helped with sculpture, so I'm sure that sculpture has helped with painting. But um, yeah, I don't know. I think now in a kind of sculptural sense. So even with painting, I'm looking at texture and communicating form in a different way, I think.
So when you're choosing like a subject to paint, do you mostly go out to look for things to inspire you, or does it just kind of like the idea just come to you and then you're like, this is what I want to do, and then you go for it?
Hmm. I think my best pieces have been kind of spur of the moment and just kind of responding to life as it unfolds. I I don't necessarily hunt for things to give me ideas. I find that I'm kind of a cerebral person. I'm thinking a lot. And so a lot of times it's just like digging through a lot of information and trying to pick out what pieces make sense and then finding subject matter that helps push that idea out, I think.
So I know you talked about how religion influences your work. Like, what is there any particular religion that you like look to, or any elements that really interest you?
Visually, I think that Christianity is probably the most present in my work, but I've looked at all of them and I love most of them. Uh, for me, I think that my thought process is a very religious one, but in an Eastern sense of making sense of the world that we live in. but visually I tend to use more like subjects and icons from the Christian tradition, just because that's the tradition that I've kind of grown up knowing the most.
Hmm. I definitely have noticed the kind of like almost like Eastern Orthodox icon aspect to your work. It's very striking. Was there any artists that really like influenced you in that direction, or just kind of stumbled into it?
In that direction, I don't know. I mean, I've got like 9 million artists that I love, but um maybe Andre Serrano would be a good one. He did a lot of kind of, I think he's still alive, but he was doing kind of Catholic type things, but really subversive. Um, and he had kind of I think he was asking a lot of the same questions that I am, but a he had a background and kind of a trauma history with being raised Catholic, so we definitely differ, I think, in our perspective of it. But he's one for sure.
I know you talk about how like your art asks questions like what are you usually trying to dig through with your art, because it's very symbolic in a very deep, meaningful way. So I've always been interested in what your perspective is, like what you're trying to get out of it.
Mm. I think most of my work is trying to make sense of things in terms of, the basic questions of life. For a while, I went through a phase where I was really heavily influenced by questions of consciousness and where do we come from and what is all of this about? Is any of it real? And I think that those are questions that are at the core of most people's art and most historical art as well. Now I'm getting into a little bit more socially relevant topics. I'm trying to narrow that scope down just because you can ponder the meaning of life all day long, but I can't really make work about that. I think it's too big of a question.
Hmm.
Uh, so lately it's politics and religion, obviously. Um, this new body of work that I'm working on, I've got one right next to me. Um, this new body of work is trying to make sense of the world that we live in right now through a lens of religious understanding. Because, oh my God, my mother just joined. Hi, Mom. um, I'm trying to make sense of the modern world and kind of social tendencies through religion, just because religion has died out in our society now.
Hmm.
I don't know if
I
that
definitely
makes
agree with that. No, no, no. That I totally understand. Is there any like philosophies that you find very interesting, or something that has kind of shaped your work as you move forward?
sense. I've definitely went through periods. There was a time when Alan Watts was a big one for me. Um, I did like a whole smattering of work based on his speaks or not speaks speeches. Um, and I would say Albert Camus, the French existential philosopher, is a big one. Um, I also really like philosophers that aren't philosophers, if that makes sense. Like, um, William S. Burroughs nonsense. I love all of that. Hubert Selby Jr., he wrote Requiem for a Dream, the book, and it, there's something to the philosophy of finding something meaningful amongst meaninglessness and chaos that I do find inspiring.
So to you, what makes a piece art? Because I know
Oh,
it's a huge subject for a lot of people, and there's always some kind of controversy. What makes something art and what makes something not art?
Mm. I would say, oh, this is a big one. I've had this conversation a lot. I don't want to step on toes, but
Do it.
uh,
Step on all the toes.
I think that the difference between any other form of human creativity and art would be intention and meaning. I think that you can be a painter, but not necessarily an artist. And I think that you could make a pretty picture. But I think that what makes something art is getting to the point where it's saying something. Um, yeah, I think that it has to say something, or else I don't think that it is art. You could just make a pretty picture because you like making pretty pictures, or you could make an ugly picture because you like ugly things. But if if there's not that element of presence and soul behind it, I don't think that I wouldn't call it art. Certainly not fine art.
Would you agree with the concept that art is communication or
Yeah,
like a key of communication?
yeah, I would definitely. I think that art art with no one to look at it doesn't make sense really. To
Hmm.
me at least. I mean, I'm sure you could do it, but I I do think that communication is a vital part of that.
Because like I'm very much in the same kind of camp as you, where like I have my own weird, I have a complete long theory of art. And it's really boring and no one else really care about it. But it comes down to the same thing that you're saying, that you can do something that's, pretty or ugly or whatever, but if it doesn't say anything, if there's no meaning behind it, it's not art. Because that's
Yeah,
what separates art from entertainment. Entertainment takes you out of yourself, makes you stop thinking, so that way you can just, kind of relax for a little bit. But art takes you into yourself, so you have to think and you have to connect with the artist through this medium.
that's an inter I've not ever thought of the division in like art and entertainment, but I've definitely that's kind of how I would define the difference between film and movies. So
Mm.
that makes sense actually. You just click something for me.
I'm glad because like we have very similar views, so that's why I've been so excited to do this interview with you. And so, what pieces are you really proud of? Like, and what's the story behind them?
Mm. I don't know. I have a lot of works that, well, not a lot. I have a handful of works that I really think were successful and that I'm proud of. Um, but they're not necessarily the award winners or the ones that sell. So, um, I've got, let me think, done a lot of weird stuff. Um, hmm. Oddly enough, it's not my good work at all. But there was one that I did in high school that I think changed everything. Um, I was going through breakup and it was a pretty rough one. And I had made this really weird watercolor and it's horrible to go back and look at. Um, but I made it and it was probably the first time that I kind of put my own symbols into something. And the first time that I just like completely composed a scene and made sense and everything about it I had really considered and kind of created for myself because I used to just kind of find pictures and draw them. But so that was a breakthrough in that sense. And then also I pissed a lot of people off with it and it turned into a series and I was fighting with the school. um I was always a straight A kid and I never got in trouble and I was in the principal's office like a dozen times while I was doing that. And I made a lot of people angry, but then nothing happened. They couldn't do anything about it, and people still talk about it in town. Um, and so I think that that was a wake up for me because it said that not like I'm capable of producing work that is meaningful and that other people can read, but also that I can make people angry and it's fine. That it doesn't matter so much. So I kind of felt like a little Robert Mapplethorpe in that moment. So I would say it's probably the ugliest thing I've made, but I'm proud of that whole moment, I think.
And that kind of goes back to the whole thing about art being, something that's meaning it communicates because you actually were able to evoke emotions in other people. Whereas lots of art people kind of look at it and they're, like, oh, okay. Whereas that actually had like a reaction. You actually got something from that. And I think that's really, really cool. So like what mediums do you prefer working in? Do you prefer sculpture over painting, or is it kind of like you go back and forth on what you want to do?
I don't know if I have a preference just because I want to use a medium that responds to the idea that I'm dealing with. So figuring out whatever I want to do, and then I pick the medium subsequent to that. So,
Mm,
like if I'm working right now, I'm doing kind of digital collage looking things, and so that to me was obviously it needed to be put in paint. I didn't want it to be digital just because one, I don't do digital things, and I also wanted to I'm all about comparing and contrasting both sides of a coin. And so I needed to use some kind of 2D but traditional medium to work through these very digital concepts. So I'm most familiar with painting and sculpture, but I don't really have a preference of medium. I always just want to follow wherever that idea leads me and try and serve it in whatever way I can.
okay. And I noticed that you talked about your contrasting things. So like the same thing with your religious versus profane. So what about the whole profane thing? Like what are you doing with that?
Oh, well, it's a big topic, and I might even be a little bit more invested in it right now than the religious thing. But to me, profanity is this notion of there being a separation between two pieces of the world, basically. So you've got the spiritual and the sacred, and then you've got
Mm,
the earthly or the physical, and another word for that is profane. So the idea would be we're living in a world of temptation, of physical bondage. We're all locked into a body that has needs. So we're kind of locked into this machine, but there's an invisible sacred part of us that is looking out from the inside. And so I'm interested in those two things and trying to find a way to make work that relates to how I see the world. But profanity, I think, is a big thing just because in the last 20, 30 years, our ability to create it and consume it has skyrocketed.
mm.
And I know that that affected me growing up and a lot of other people. And so for me, I don't ever make things up for the sake of being shocking or disgusting. I'm finding things. I'm always sourcing. Like all of the images that you see in my work come from the internet. I go out and I find them and then I use them. And I think that it's important for me because I want to hold up a mirror to the world that I see. So for me, profanity isn't so much about being shocking for the sake of itself, but if it's shocking, I want it to be kind of a wake up call because it's from real life. I'm pulling things from the world around us. So that I think is it, it- for me, profanity is just an extension of realism.
Okay, so kind of like have you ever looked into like Gnosticism or anything like that?
Nope.
Kind of the sense that matter itself is a prison and it's like quote unquote evil.
Hmm.
At least some sects. There's Gnosticism isn't one like whole con, cohesive Christian religion, but it was like a bunch of little sects that sprang up at the birth of Christianity. I think you might really might enjoy some of that stuff. But one of their things was that the soul or the spirit was sacred, as you're saying, and that matter itself was a prison that was created by this false god called the demiurge. It's really trippy, weird stuff. But I think that it has that kind of similar dualistic stuff. Do you see yourself as a dualist, or kind of as someone that's commenting on how we contrast these things that shouldn't be contrasted?
Mm. I don't know. I do think that the way that I see the world is through a lens of dualism, but I also think that, which is where the self kind of falls into that, I think that our experience of the world is kind of the interplay or the dance between dual forces. So maybe I am. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but probably.
I'm always very interested in people that see things as dualistic or non-dualistic because it really informs how we look at the world. If you see things as kind of non-dualistic, everything's the same, and it's like, oh, then everything's hunky-dory all the time.
Hmm.
Even like then they'll kind of explain away even cruelty, pain, and all that stuff. Because I'm myself am a non-dualist, so I kind of see myself falling into that. I'm like, wait, no, but this is real stuff people experience. Whereas dualism itself has those elements of like, yes, there is pain, there is reality, and there is this kind of this other, which I find very fascinating. I don't know. I don't think either one are correct. I don't think we can ever know what's correct. But it's so interesting to see how people, especially artists, how it informs their work. And is
Yeah.
there like any particular things that you like seem to show into your art that's kind of dualistic or,
Oh
like as you
yeah.
said, contrasting? What's your favorite contrast that you've put together?
Oh. Oddly enough, I don't think that I've ever kind of looked at my work as being really dualistic, but now that you say it, it makes total sense. Let me think. I just got done with one, and it's not the best thing that I've ever made, but I've got prints of it. Um, so I took this. Is it flip for you, like reverse mirror, or can you read this?
I can't read it because the resolution is kind of down.
Oh, okay.
That's
Well,
just from my end.
so that's probably a good example. Um, Visually, I like to throw things together that don't quite make sense, or you wouldn't be able to see the connection. Um, Barbara Kruger is a person that I kind of look at when I'm dealing with text and combining it with images. But so for that one, um, I've got this. This is a linoleum print, but it's based on a painting that I did, and I've got this face, which was this. I can't remember his name now, but he was killed on the internet, and I remember seeing that video, and so that's actually I think the first video that I ever saw that was really kind of graphic through the internet. And so it keeps popping up in my work, but I wanted to compare this idea of physical violence along with emotional violence. So hidden in the background there's text, and then in front of it is a text. And it's all pulled from the end of my last relationship. Text from my boyfriend when I found out he was cheating. So, um, heavy stuff and probably pretty irresponsible of me to do, but I do like. the kind of extreme separation of things that do have an underlying theme. So it, which is probably just the way that I see the world. But I don't know. I did that. I did a series of vases that were all pulled, like the aesthetic themes were pulled from mid 17th century in France, like rich people pottery. And all of those pots are beautiful and they're ornate and they were commissioned, which means that only rich people could afford to have them. So they really reflected rich people taste. And I was interested in that because now living in a modern age where I don't have to be so concerned with selling my work, I can just get a job somewhere else or sell it to someone else. I am free to use this kind of glorification and decorative element um, to not compare, but to kind of glorify the things that I'm seeing in pop culture now. So kind of I wanted to mix high taste and low taste and high art and low art with that one. And so I made this pretty vase and it was covered in gold and it had images painted on it from the internet that were all like graphic snuff film stuff. So pretty what's the word? Pretty disparate like looking things, but it made sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to everyone else.
I remember seeing the picture of that face. It looked, I loved the strikingness of it because, like as you said, it had that kind of high quality, rich taste to it, but then had very kind of like the snuff film stuff, like very graphic, very striking. And so, like it just it burns an image into your mind, and that's what I love about your work is that your stuff is really memorable.
Oh,
And so that's something that really has struck me. That's why like you're one of my favorite artists on the internet because like I just love seeing all your stuff. Is there any like projects that you're really excited about that are coming up that you're working
yeah.
on right now?
Right next to me, I'll flip it around for you. Um, I've got this big thing, uh,
Wow.
and it's paired with this big thing. Um, so with both of these guys, I'm interested yet again, unbelievably, in comparing and contrasting opposites. But um, I'm working on putting together uh, my thesis show for my undergraduate degree, and I don't want to give too much away, but um, I'm I'm really interested in the idea that Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead and we killed him, and I'm interested in that because I do think that religion as a whole in our society has kind of died out now, but I'm interested in the hole that's been left by the absence of God. And I think the more that I stare into that hole, the more that I find. And this is kind of the stuff that I'm talking about in terms of political issues. I think that for a lot of people, politics has become a form of religion, particularly for people that felt ostracized by traditional religion. So we see a lot of kind of activism and political fighting and really kind of building your identity and sense of purpose around these political issues. And I think that that's probably because people are having a crisis of meaning right now. Um, so to kind of explore that, I'm making these big paintings that are centered on a specific political issue, but I'm making opposite paintings, if that makes sense. So for this one, I'm running with the political theory or ideology of body positivity and the fat acceptance movement. And I'm pairing up, I've got anorexic fetish models from the internet. And then on the other panel, I have obesity fetish models from the internet. And smattered about them are comments from people that are viewing this stuff and I guess paying for it. And then hidden in there also is ripped up scripture from the New Testament. So um, I'm, what's the word? I want to have 8 of them, so I'm excited about that. But yeah, and they're taking too long. But I'm definitely excited for what's going to be unveiled in the spring.
Do you work in like acrylics or oils?
Oil only.
Okay, because all the people that I really admire, they only do oil, and I'm like, man, I only do acrylics because I can't afford oils. Like, what do you do to kind of get around that?
If you if you if you have a good handle of acrylic, it translates almost immediately to oil. And the expense of oil is really just kind of an upfront cost. I have some paints of two, and like you see how big I'm working. They're 5 foot paintings behind me, pretty big.
Hmm.
Um, I've had some tubes of paint that are like this big, and I've had them for like 2 years now. Just because you thin it out, and like acrylic, it comes out of the tube, and you use that quantity. But with oil, you can get away a lot more with kind of thinning it down and using medium and spread. Like it spreads out way more than acrylic does.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to try it at some point because like I just love the blending that I see in like everyone's pieces. It's so freaking hard to do that with acrylics sometimes. It's like I walk away for 10 seconds to get like a drink and then I come back and it's already dried. I'm like, because like I wanted to blend a certain spot, but I
Mhm.
could just maybe I'm just using crap paint. But
No,
that,
acrylic dries really quickly.
like, so what would you say for artists that are just starting out, or people that are wanting to get into the arts? What advice would you give them? Like things to look into, or
Mm. I don't know. I think that everybody's experience within their artistic practice is different. Everybody's concerns are different. The things that people want to share and express are very different. But I think that the biggest piece of advice that I would give anyone, and I give anyone that comes around, is that um, it's going to be really hard. It's brutally hard, and it requires discipline, and it can be a very ostracizing experience because a lot of people aren't going to understand what you're doing. They're not going to understand why you're spending so much time making crazy shit that people don't look at. Um, and I think that figuring out whether or not like you really want to do it is important. But if you do, find the things that interest you. Find the subject matter that's interesting to you. Um, you have to stay curious, I think, and stay interested in things around you to be able to keep up with an artistic practice for very long. Because it just starts to feel like you're screaming into the abyss for no reason and no one's ever going to hear you. And so you have to learn to have that conversation with yourself until other people come around to actually listening to you.
that's pretty good. And I like that.
So I would say
So
like being authentic, being present is really important. Honesty with your work and really being honest with yourself, I think is the biggest thing.
So where can people find you on like social media or websites? Do you have anything that's set up?
Yeah, so I have my Instagram, obviously, which I am on right now. And then I have a YouTube channel, but I don't really post anything on it anymore. Just one-off videos every now and then. Um, I have a website. It's linked in my bio, so if you find yourself on my profile and want to view more stuff that I can't put on Instagram, that's where to go.
Okay, I'm also gonna be putting this onto YouTube. So like, what's the name for uh your website so that way people can see it there?
It should be www.travissparks.com or travismsparks.com.
Okay, perfect. It was awesome having you on, dude. I'm so excited we finally were able to do this.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Is there anything that you want to share before we end here?
I don't think so. I think you covered a lot.
Okay, awesome. It was great talking with you.
You too.
Well, that was awesome having Travis on with us today. Go check out his stuff. Check out his Instagram. Check out his YouTube if you can find it, and his website. So I will see you guys next week for another episode. Um, I'll put up a post on who I'm having for the guest. I can't remember offhand what it is, but I'll have the announcement soon. Um, Definitely go check out his work and subscribe if you're on when this goes on YouTube. Subscribe, hit that like button so that way you can see more of these videos. I really look forward to doing the next one. Peace, y'all.